Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Applied Epic Security Essentials. My name is Lauren Roberts, Chief Agency Consultant here at Kite Technology Group. I'm joined today by Jason Gobbel, Chief Technology Officer at Kite Tech. So we're glad you joined us today, and we are excited to be sharing today's content, of course. Before we jump into today's topic, here's a little more information about Kite Technology. We are a managed IT service provider and consulting firm serving small and mid-sized businesses across the country. We specialize in serving independent insurance agencies, nonprofits, and other professional organizations, but work with many different businesses across a variety of industries. We strive to help the organizations we partner with leverage technology so they can maximize their business performance. As mentioned earlier, I am Lauren Roberts, Chief Agency Consultant here at Kite Technology Group. I've been with Kite Tech for several years now, too many to count, I suppose. Maybe I just don't want to age myself. But I do have a background in insurance as well. I used to work in insurance agencies and several different aspects of the agency, from servicing to accounting to administration. And so, that really helped me develop my passion to help insurance agencies with their utilization of Applied Epic. So I work with a lot of agencies and lead a fantastic team of consultants who help with Epic migrations from any source system. We also help agencies optimize their utilization of Epic and standardize processes throughout their system. And we also offer bookkeeping services as well. So that's enough about me. I'm going to hand it over to the star of security today, Jason, our Chief Solutions Partner. I got that right this time.
Former CTO. As over the last couple of years, my role has really transitioned to one of education. I don't actually turn the screwdrivers anymore. I just help agencies understand all this stuff and navigate the cybersecurity and the compliance and all that crazy stuff. So these days I'm really all about turning these stuff into solutions. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about some IT security best practices, starting with with the initial logic of it all so we can build it up. Then we're going to talk a bit about Epic security and security groups, how to add users, how to configure the structure, the program, the bank accounts, all that fun stuff. Talk about some additional security features in Epic. So that's what we're in here today. So let's start with some of these IT best practices. So this is my girlfriend's favorite part of the presentation. We have trust issues. Okay, first of all, if you're hiring people you don't trust, we need to have a different conversation. But by and large, everybody who gets hired, they get hired because they're trustworthy. So I often hear executives say, well, I trust all my people and I want them to have access to everything so they can do a good job and all this stuff. And that's not the way trust works from a cybersecurity perspective. Great for the relationship, not so much for the cybersecurity. Trust equals exposure. And that's what we need to talk about today. So trust is really about exposure. If you trust somebody and you give them access to everything, how much is going to be exposed when that account gets compromised? And it's not an if, it is a when. It will happen every time, 10 times out of 10. I don't know when, but I know it will be. So how many client records, how many years of data? So our job as trusted stewards of this data is to do as little as possible and to provide as little as possible. So when that user account gets compromised, we've exposed only what was necessary to get the job done. We call that in the cybersecurity space the principle of least privilege. Giving the account, we trust the person, We don't trust the account. The account is going to get compromised at some point. So we start with 0. We have an account. It has a username and a password, and it has access to nothing. And then we build a profile based on what that individual and what that account needs to do, what it needs to access. So we limit that access to only the things necessary to do the job, and we limit the time frame on that. When you take for example, an average account executive or CSR, they're working on a workload of a year's worth of renewals, maybe 18 months, maybe 24. Beyond that, things start to fall off. So do they need direct access to 10 or 15 or 20 years of data to do the job at hand? Generally, no. And you need to think about this from a perspective of where the data lives. Sometimes it's in SharePoint or OneDrive. Sometimes it's in a mailbox. Sometimes it's in Epic. Role-based access controls. That's the next term that we need to introduce and put into the table. It is very difficult at scale to describe Sally and Bob and Lucy and Tom and all of the things that they have access to. So we like to think in terms of groups and roles. Tom is a producer. Sally is bookkeeping. Larry is commercial lines account executive. So we start to think in these terms of these groups so we can put the people into the groups, and then we can drive all of our security posture off of the group. And sometimes that's by department, sometimes it's teams. A lot of agencies will put a book of business together aligned by a producer or a group of producers. Some of them will do it by alphabet, A through F or something of that regard. I don't know that there are any right or wrong answers in terms of that. Generally speaking, whatever the groups, however they best reflect how the agency actually transacts and does business, the easier it's going to be to put people into that and for it to be understood. So once you have your groups, then you start to move on to tasks. Tasks generally have 3 types of scenarios: adding to the system, modifying stuff that's in the system, and then deleting from the system. So you start to think in terms of those as well. An account executive that works in Larry's producer group, do they need to add? Do they need to modify? Absolutely. Do they need to delete? Maybe not. So that framework allows for some changes to make it a little flexible. Security is not really known as the most flexible of things. But then when you think about an application like Epic that's got many different services, many different parts, oftentimes there's some opportunities to limit various areas of the program as well. Back office stuff, security stuff, maybe reports. Maybe that's something. If you have some that doesn't work in benefits, maybe that's an area that you want to carve off in terms of your tasks and your stuff. And if you do it this way and you build on it, it's very easy to trust the system, give the people the access they need, but verify it. That's one of the principles that we preach in security. Never believe that it's done. It's always a journey, not a destination. So you want to be reviewing all of these controls, all of these groups annually, because what inevitably happens is people get promotions, people get raises, people leave, people come in, and if you're not paying attention, you'll find that somebody has moved into a new group, but they didn't leave the old group. So auditing those things becomes a critical part of the controls. So let's talk about some practical considerations where the rubber meets the road, because we talk about these things like principles of least privilege and big terms. Let's talk about some practical things. Owned devices versus bring your own devices, employee-owned devices. We'll talk about MFA versus single sign-on and what that means. And then we're going to talk about what the current fight is Rick versus the browser. Is it more secure? You hear a lot of fights about I'm not moving to the browser until X and Y and Z. So let's pick that apart for a second. Let's start with the concept of, do we provide the devices? Do we own the devices? BYOD. So ownership is important, but in order to get there and figure out why it's important, we need to think about where the work is actually being done, because we want to manage and secure the experience. In the RIC, it's an application that lives on a desktop. In the browser, it's an application that lives on the desktop. Instead of it being an installed application by Applied Systems, it's Chrome or it's Microsoft Edge or Firefox or Opera, or insert the name of the browser here. But it's still an application that lives on a desktop that needs a level of control. So one of the big things we need to think about when we talk about, who has an obligation to secure the work experience, is always a fight about visibility versus privacy. I can't protect what I can't see. So I have to have visibility. And once I see it, I can't unsee it. That's where the privacy comes in. So generally speaking, the best practice, you want to own and control where the work is being done. So in the case of a cell phone, a mobile phone, this is my personal phone. KiteTech doesn't own it, but all of my email goes through Outlook. So KiteTech, as an example, has put a wrapper around the Outlook application. It's the only application I can access if I want to get my email on the go. So in that regard, we've solved the visibility issue. They can see the application, they cannot see the phone. So we've solved the control issue. They can always kick me out of the application without impacting the phone. So that's ultimately where I think the reality is you're going to have a bit of both. You're going to have some application management on some personal devices. You're going to have some corporate owned devices, desktops, laptops, things of that nature. But I tend to recommend, if the predominant activity, 9 times out of 10, I'm working on this particular device, that device needs to be owned by the agency. That's kind of the bottom line there.
Yeah, and that's one thing, Jason. I, of course, am not as well versed in the security aspect of things from the IT standpoint, but that is one of those huge red flags when someone says, "Oh yeah, they're using their personal laptop," or whatever the case is. I'm like, "Oh, are you that? I don't think that you should be doing that." Matt, I need to get you with some people.
I I die a little inside every time I hear that, and
Yeah.
and I hear the same thing when we move to the browser. It's like, oh, now that we're in the browser, anybody can use any device.
Mm,
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
sleep so well at night when I hear those words.
No, not at all. And I like how you said wrapper around, the email and things like that, because I thought it was more of like a wall from the user experience. Just
It's like a big warm security hug. We're huggers over here, so that's what we do. We just hug all the things and keep them safe and snuggled in, and sometimes that means owning the device. It's fine.
well, Jerry says who needs sleep anyways. But we do have a couple of questions for you, Jason. Lynn is asking, she says, so you're saying that if you access work emails on your phone, it would be best to only access through the Outlook app?
Yes. Uh, there's some caveats there. I'm assuming a couple of things, and the first thing I'm assuming is that you're using Microsoft 365 and not Google or G Suite or something like that. So the answers may vary, but by and large, most agencies are using Microsoft 365 to host their email. And the iPhone app, the Mail app, I'm an Android user, so I only hear how wonderful it is, but I hear that the iPhone app, the native experience, does a fantastic job of overlaying the personal calendar with the corporate calendar, and it provides a really good unified view of the world. I've never seen that. My stuff's always broken. So I don't know what it feels like to give it up. But I've seen it happen and I've seen the tears when it does happen. But yes, long story short, you do want to be restricting your email access to the Outlook app if you're using Microsoft 365. It's the only way to control the experience, and it's the only way to guarantee a level of security without stepping over the line and invading somebody's privacy. I can do that with the iPhone app, but I have to get more access to the device than you're probably comfortable with, and certainly more access to the device that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah. We have another question from Paige. She says, what are your thoughts on someone using our phone systems app, Ring Central, on their personal phone to make work calls? Again, it sounds like using the app is the best practice. So what do you think, Jason?
So the interesting thing, and the reason why we standardize on Outlook as the application is because it can be controlled. It's not that the iPhone app is a bad thing. It's that Microsoft has built wrappers and controls within the application. In Ring Central's case, that's not necessarily true. Ring Central probably has some security controls within their app, but it's not on a global scale. It's not as a Microsoft. It's not tied to a user account, or necessarily has to be tied to a user account. So it's there is some security stuff in there, but that's really more of a moral dilemma. What benefits the employee? What benefits the company? And are you compensating them for that resource? Is it being allowed as a convenience for them? Are you mandating it? Because then you have some issues where you're starting to mandate some things that happen on a device that you don't own and you didn't pay for. And we see these things with the Microsoft Authenticator app. We see these things with Outlook. Um, at, at the end of the day, this device had a price tag and I paid it. So what does that look like? Um, that's going to look different for every agency based on what you do. I see a lot of folks these days, they don't even have physical phones. Everything is an app. So maybe it makes sense to have a stipend in that regard. Maybe it makes sense to step over the line a bit and provide a device. If it's not happening on the go and everything can be Wi-Fi, you can actually provide a mobile phone that is basically a glorified tablet. Doesn't have a phone number, it just has some data access. So lots of ways to slice and dice that. A lot of considerations that have to be made along the way. It's not an easy decision, and it's not always a direct path.
All right. I just love how you put things. That's like a moral decision. You make me laugh. In case you
It
got
is, and it's fundamentally different when we think back to the days of where we first started these things and we whipped out our Blackberries and the data plan was $65 a month, and the only reason I had it was because you wanted me to check my email on weekends. Like, I'm going to need $65 a month from you if you want that to happen. And it's different now that everything is unlimited, and like how much of that $100 a month phone line or that $75 phone line, how much of it's actually attributed to the work usage
Yeah.
versus me endlessly scrolling on my couch. It's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, the days of cell phones, Blackberries, all of those things. All right, well, Jason, the next question is probably going to be answered by your next slide. So I'm going to move us on over into MFA and single sign-on. Just so you know, Lynn's question is, with the use of personal computers from home, are there recommendations on how to make more secure using Outlook for email and Epic browser? It is for on occasion work when needing to work from home. So I am sure you are getting ready to answer that question in this next slide.
I am, and it's very easy to cut from a cybersecurity perspective. It is very easy to come down from the clouds and say, okay, no company work gets done on any personal device ever. Full stop. It's very easy to say that. But here in the really real world, where people get sick and kids break arms, like stuff happens. So you do have to find and kind of meet in the middle. And some of these things really speak to what this slide is about, which is multi-factor authentication, single sign-on. The big exposure when you're using a personal device to get this done is, if I'm not controlling the browser experience, I can save my passwords in my personal Chrome that you don't have access to and you've got no legal right to. And if my computer ever gets compromised and my stored passwords get exfiltrated, they just ran away with your password. Or if I download some stuff and there's a keylogger that's happening, so as I'm typing in my stuff, it's being reported, it's being stolen actively. So that's a real challenge and a real consideration. So some of the things that we can implement to mitigate that risk and minimize that risk. Number one, multi-factor authentication. There's got to be a multi-factor authentication mechanism, be it a code or a text message, although not a big fan of the text messages, authentication app, biometrics, physical devices. There needs to be something. So that's important. And of course, I'm surprised we haven't seen it in the chat. The obvious thing is, but Epic doesn't put MFA into their product. They do, just not in the way that we were thinking it was going to happen. They actually did it, in my humble opinion, they did it the best way, which is we'll support anything you bring in the door. And that's where the single sign-on piece comes in. A lot of agencies are still using dedicated usernames and passwords to log into their Epic system. There's no way to secure that. There's no way to bolt MFA on it. So what you need to do there is implement single sign-on. So single sign-on really is the concept in layman's terms is taking an application like Epic and then using a centralized database of logins. So with single sign-on, let's pick on Microsoft 365 for a second, because we're probably all using it to some degree. I have an email address and a password that logs into Microsoft. That thing is protected by MFA. It's protected by conditional access. I've written a bunch of security parameters around how and when I can log into Microsoft. I have to do it from a corporate PC. I have to do it from the continental US. We have those requirements. So when I turn Epic over to my single sign-on in Microsoft 365, it now has to abide by those rules. So I can't log into Epic unless I'm doing it from a device that can authenticate with Microsoft first. So we kind of back into those rules. So using SSO enforces your MFA, it enforces conditional access. It allows you to get really detailed and comprehensive. So if you decide as an agency that personal devices not going to happen, that's the enforcement mechanism. If you decide that it is going to happen, and maybe you do, every now and then you need to work from home, log in, do a thing, you can write exceptions and open the door just a little bit for just a little bit of time to make these things functional. So it's not it's not just a matter of flipping a switch when you turn on the single sign-on. There's stuff that has to happen in Microsoft 365. You need to contact Applied Systems and say, hey, we're making this change, and this change happens for everybody. So you need to have it set up, you need to have it tested, you need to have it working, because when the switch happens, and maybe don't do it on a Monday morning, but when the switch happens, everybody now has to do it the new way. So it's a coordination between the staff, between the IT services, and between Applied Systems themselves. In our experience, it's not painful. It's not a bad switch. Every now and then something doesn't work, and it does take a half hour or so to figure it out and get it working again. But it's certainly not something one should be afraid of.
Okay, very good. We did have one comment on the email thing. Todd says he just has the staff create a Gmail account for work. So I'm assuming that means to use that on personal devices.
I don't know, but the words make me nervous.
I mean, I was kind of thinking the same.
How we've now created a second account. How are we monitoring that account? How are we managing it? What data lives in that account? How do we extract it if we have a parting of ways with an employee? If it gets compromised, how do we even know what got compromised? Generally speaking, I think it is securable in a certain way. I just don't have enough information to kind of wrap my brain around it. But my immediate red flag is, well, now I've got two accounts. I've doubled my workload for the things I have to manage, and that's what single sign-on seeks to solve.
Mhm.
Is when you think about it, an average commercial lines account executive, they've got 108 different logins to various carrier websites, to various state websites, all kinds of crazy stuff. Single sign-on is the mechanism where we want to take all of those and distill it to one, and then provide some ironclad security around the one, and provide some ironclad monitoring around the one, just in case security gets compromised, so that we know. We know if there are anomalous logins. We know if somebody logged in from Russia in the middle of the night. It's all about that visibility while maintaining privacy.
Very good. All right, so now I feel like you're probably going to chastise anyone that has not switched over from the desktop to the browser version of Epic. And I'll just be over here cheering you on.
I am, and I'm old. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've seen many applications go to browser interfaces. Every single time they are slower. This is a fact. When Outlook Web Access first became a thing, OWA, it's like, oh my God, this is fantastic, but why is it slow compared to my Exchange server in my office? Always going to be slower. Uh, the DNS queries, all the technical stuff, the magic that needs to happen to show you that browser screen is unbelievably complex. So I I mean, I'll give you the spoiler alert. Go to the browser, just get there. Um, but I do want to give you some practical advice along the way. From a security perspective, you still need to manage updates, applications, end user experiences. So your obligations to provide good stewardship of the technology don't go away. They're still there, Rick versus browser. So if you were thinking that you were going to gain something in the security space by going to the browser, you really just you traded one apple for another apple. You still have to perform application updates on the connection suite instead of the RIC. The RIC goes away, but the software's still there. And you still have to manage the application experience. Now you need to be in the business of managing the browser experience. And that might be a new thing for your agency. A lot of folks, they just use Chrome, and they sync it to a Gmail account, and now they've got some commingling of some personal stuff and their bank information with some stored passwords and stuff. So we have to wrap a security bubble around that. I have a strong preference for Microsoft Edge as the browser, um, because it can be performed very well, um, very easily. There's a process that gets you a corporate browser experience that restricts some things if you deem it necessary to restrict them, but really provides a good working space that the corporation can manage, has some visibility, and still allows some flexibility. But
And
yeah, go to the browser. Just just
well,
just
and
just go.
I'll just add to that. One of the key points that you listed here is that all the new updates and experiences are happening in the browser. And our concern on this consulting side is that your staff is going to be really shocked by all of the changes. I mean, even us who are in it every day and we're seeing the changes and we look at the updates and things like that, it's still hard to keep up with sometimes. I mean, I was just in a screen today and I'm actually updating security group information, which we'll talk about later. I was like, wait, there used to be like a grant all button. Where did this thing go? So, it takes a while to get used to that. So, for your
Yeah.
agency, if you're still in that desktop version, we definitely recommend that you take a couple of power users and have them start working through doing their daily jobs in the browser, get familiar with it so that they see what the differences are. And you have kind of a support group for a support group. You probably do need a support group if you waited this long. We got all the jokes today. But
Yeah, and we're what, 10 months out, 12 months out from the first time a new feature hit the browser and didn't hit the actual installed client. So
yeah,
we've already lost a year's worth of cool stuff.
exactly.
And,
Yeah. So,
and
I will say,
if you're okay with that, again, we need to have a different conversation. But it's gonna get worse as it goes on. There's gonna be better stuff. They're gonna be driving efficiencies. Um,
mhm,
all their new integrations, all their cool AI stuff that
mhm,
they're talking a lot about. It's all going to be happening in that browser experience, and you don't want to have to be learning all that new stuff while you're learning the new screens that are really a year old.
yeah.
You're missing out. You're absolutely missing out, and you're going to be missing out on more.
Yeah. And I will say that, a lot of times the questions that we get are, do I have all of the same functionality? And for the most part, yes. There's a few, functions that have changed a little bit. Things like your front end scanning, the process is a little bit different now. But yes, you still all have the same functionality. You don't have to change your workflows. It's just things are in different places. So, you do need to go ahead and get in there. Had great feedback from agencies who have successfully established that team of folks that are kind of reviewing everything first, asking the questions, figuring things out, and then, ultimately moving everybody over to the browser. Actually, one of our agencies is on this call, and they had the wonderful idea to say, hey, Kite, can you just get rid of the desktop for everybody because we're switching to the browser now? We're ready to go, cut it off. So props to them. That was a great idea.
That's the way to do it. Rip off the band-aid. I like it.
Right, but I will continue and not rant any longer because I do have a couple of questions, Jason. So question from, hopefully I say this correctly, Andre. We have our staff use the password program Dashlane and do single sign-on whenever possible. Where can I find out how to get Epic on single sign-on?
First order of business is to call applied support, and they will send you the documentation. You take that documentation, you hand it over to your IT folks, and that's going to start the process. Um, there's some stuff that needs to happen on the back end before we're ready for the switch to applied systems, but that's where it starts. That way, you get the latest version of the instructions. Very easy to do.
Mhm. Okay. Joe Popper has a question for us. He says, Applied has said Chrome is the preferred browser for the web version of Epic. Is this not true?
That's probably true, but there's a little bit of nuance. So Chrome as a browser is built on a framework called Chromium. Edge is also built on Chromium. So while there are some functional differences upstream, the reality is they're both built on the same platform. So is Chrome the preferred value browser? Probably. Are you going to be able to manage the end user experience as well? No. So you have to pick a winner. I always pick the winner. If we go back to the last question where they're using Dashlane as a password manager, in a managed Edge browsing experience, I can install that Microsoft extension. I could install the extension into the Edge browser so that every new employee who opens up a web browser already has their Dashlane stuff installed, like magic. It's a lot harder to do that when you're not managing the browser experience in a Chrome environment. So for me, I'm all on Edge until somebody can build me a platform that's equal to my end user experience, that's equal to the level of security I drive on behalf of the user. That's where I place my bet.
Okay. All right. I think this might be the last question before we jump over into the applied world. So we have, oh, actually one more really good question. Thanks, Jane. So Jose says the browser version of Epic has many cons versus pros as far as working in it. He says, I guess the main pro is the security, but it's hard when Epic does not work as good as the desktop. So I would highly recommend that if you are having issues with, the browser versus the desktop, to make sure that you share that information with applied support, because they are constantly working to, update things and make everything work better. And we did see, a little bit of difference in the very beginning, but we as a consulting team, again, we work in Epic browser every single day. I haven't really seen many issues in quite a while. So, so I definitely, any of that information that you have, definitely recommend that you pass that on to applied support.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens to get web traffic to your screen. So it's important that on your internet traffic, on your desktop, that you're prioritizing the IP addresses that Applied Systems uses, the visual experience they're using. You want to make sure nothing's getting blocked. You want to make sure that that traffic is receiving the highest and fastest marching orders from your router, from your firewalls. All that stuff needs to play well and be properly tuned to give you that good experience.
Very good. And then I'm assuming the answer to this one's yes, since I know that it was done for one of our agencies. Jane says, do you have a script to uninstall Epic Desktop remotely? I have had to do it one user at a time. Ew.
Yes, there is a script that gets it done. There's a PowerShell that gets it done. It will have to be done one user at a time if you don't have an orchestration engine like Active Directory or Microsoft Intune or something like that. Oftentimes, your IT folks will have what they call an RMM, which is a remote monitoring and management tool. And if you can provide them with some instructions or a PowerShell script, they can bring it into their system and roll it out on your behalf.
I think we are all good. All right, I'm typing the answer too, but Danielle said she does notice that the Epic browser does move a little bit slower, but that was kind of while you were saying, make sure you bring that up to your IT team and make sure everything is prioritized. So I'm still going to do the typed answer. You're welcome.
Yeah, I can almost guarantee in every situation there's a quality of service or QoS rule set that you can use to prioritize and improve that experience.
Yes. Okay, one more question actually. Our entire agency is using Epic browser, but we all still have the desktop version. We only use this if there are internet issues. Do you recommend this? That's the last one for you. I'm going to get on my stuff. Okay, you're going to have to answer questions in the background. You're a little more popular than I thought you would be, Jason. We love each other. We really do.
Wow, is that what you really think about me? You just invite me to the show because like it's a handout? I mean, I know you draw the bigger crowds than you. That's fair. I admit it. Wow, I didn't know I meant so little to you, Lauren. It hurts. It
Yeah.
hurts, bro.
This is why I love these little reactions that keep coming up. I can tell if people actually think we're funny this time, not like just ambiguously wondering.
They don't think we're just necessarily in the way of good knowledge. So if we would just be quiet and get on with the good knowledge.
Yeah. Got
So,
it.
do I recommend keeping the desktop version for when you have internet issues? I don't. I don't like that crutch because there's not really a good way to ensure that people aren't going back to the old way of doing things. Every now and then you will find that person in the corner that is going to use that thing. They'll tell you they're using the browser, but they're not. And then when you figure out that all the stuff that they put into Epic is wrong because they're following a workflow that doesn't exist anymore, that becomes a problem. I would change the question. Why is your internet so bad?
That's a good one.
There's there shouldn't be a scenario where your internet is so terrible that you have to plan for a band-aid. So I would start there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know there are some rural agencies out there that have to use some strange stuff, DSL and satellite uplink and things of that nature. Um, but I would start there. I would start really understanding why the internet's slow, why it's unreliable, why it's unpredictable, and really work towards fixing that before I started accepting permanent band-aids.
I like it. Very good. See, he knows those types of things. I would have never thought. Let me just go check and see what's wrong with the internet. I love it when people ask me techie questions. I'm like, I know enough to get in trouble. Let me
So
just send you over
that's why I
these.
have a guy.
That's why I've got a guy. That's a new country song. Got a guy for that. All right, we're going to keep going into Applied Epic. Jason, I'm going to hand the Q&A over to you for those security questions that are left. And we are going to jump over into really going through some of the areas within Epic that you can configure to create a little bit more security and standardization as you are, adding users. If you're migrating to Epic, or even if you've migrated to Epic, I'm going to show you a couple of ways that we can do some auditing of that information. So of course, we kind of start with login. So when you're thinking about adding a new user in Epic, you are going to have to add a login, and then you're going to have to configure the users. There's different types of users. We have security groups. So we're going to kind of touch on those different areas. One thing I want to point out as far as logins are concerned, I did give a little pathway here. We're going to go into configure security and logins. In just a second, I'm going to jump over into Epic, but this is where you are going to set up your user's password or reset their password if necessary. You've got the user type. Now in the browser, you will have the dashboards access if you have the dashboards that are super awesome and everybody loves them. And you've got the personalization for that, as well as what databases are they even accessing? Do they still have access to sample data or the demo database, or just your production database? What's the access level there? One thing to keep in mind here, and I'm going to jump over into Epic in just a second, is, we have people that get married and change their names and things like that, right? So one thing that I really like to point out here that's kind of a red flag is that Applied does not recommend editing the user code when you have an existing login, because these changes can actually have serious repercussions through Epic. That came directly from the help file, just so you guys know. That's how serious it is. Kind of like when you go into structure and it says, don't do anything until you call Applied. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Always find to change the user's name in there. But if they are going to, if you want to change the user code, definitely be careful on that and consider maybe inactivating and creating a new one. But, a lot of times folks are fine with just keeping that old user code. So over in Epic, I do like to pull up that we are going to be in configure. And once we go into configure, we're going to look down on the left-hand side over at security. And this is where a lot of the configuration is going to start. So I'm clicking on the logins because this is kind of where you're going to get everything started. You've got to create a login for them. going to create the user for them. And then just specifics on the repercussions. Yes, Lori, there's probably quite a few. So think about things like anytime you're thinking about a code in Epic, they are tied out in so many different places. The one that we most commonly run into is like GL subaccounts for your chart of accounts. General ledger, I know that's accounting specific, but you can't change things like that once they're in Epic. So it's really important that you can't really change those at all. You could change the lookup code for the company, but that's not going to change anything on that sub account. So there's just a lot of places in Epic where these things are connected in the background, and that's why you just want to be really, really cautious about any time you would look to change a lookup code, so to speak. Okay, so back over here in security logins, this is where you're going to be adding folks in. I'm going to click on the edit button. We're of course not going to edit applied support because we can't do anything about that. I do have some folks ask me like, what's this applied support login? That's basically so they can help you out in any way, shape, or fashion if you need help. So that's their way of getting in there. That's their back door. No, you're not paying for an extra license for applied support. So here in this area, you've got a couple of things that you'll see. This is where you're going to add in their full name, their user code, however you decide to format that for your agency. Make sure that that's a standard. You've got your your active, locked, and forced password change. Active means this is an active login, that it's a person that can log into your system. When you get ready to offboard this person, you would obviously change that to inactive. There's no actions inactivate in the system. For this area, it's going to be unchecking that box. It will show you if they have locked out, if they've gotten locked out of their specific login. So you have the ability as an admin, as long as your security rights are set up properly, to unlock them by unchecking that box. And in the event that your user does need you to force their password change or change your password for them, if they don't have the reset password option or the many options that you can have now with the single sign-on and MFA and all of those things that Jason knows about, if you have to do that, you would want to do an actions change password. But in addition to that, you want to make sure you force a password change. So if you send them over a little generic password, password 123, you want to force that password change so that they have the opportunity to create a complex password to log in. Of course, these things are pretty irrelevant if you are using things like the MFA or single sign-on. You will notice that you also have the email address area in here. That is important for that function of resetting the password. And then we have things like the user type. Now, your user type is extremely important to understand, and I'm actually going to move over to the next slide for this. You have the option to basically give someone the keys to the kingdom. That is what an enterprise admin user is. Typically, agencies like to limit this extremely because we don't want to have folks able to do anything and everything in the system. An enterprise admin user even has more rights than someone that you could have given every right in Epic to. So that's something to keep in mind is, even thinking about things like reversing a transaction. I could give users the ability to do that, but if they are a user and not an enterprise admin, and there's some other things that have happened, they still can't do it. But in certain situations, an enterprise admin can still do an action of reverse transaction. So it's a really, really, important area to consider when you're looking at enterprise admin users. Typically, I only see folks like owners and, possibly the controller, or operations, and sometimes even accounting, depending on the size of the agency and the restrictions that you have in place. Those users might have that enterprise admin access. And also sometimes you need that because, well, you're definitely going to need somebody to be an enterprise admin, but it's also important that your staff knows who those are so that they can reach out if something is seriously going on. So be very careful with your enterprise admin. If they are a user, however, right here, user means that we have the ability to edit their access individually or by security group. However, don't ever edit their access to programs in their user level. And I will show you why in just a minute. We really recommend what we're going to talk about next, which is the security group, because your security group is going to specify that access for a group of users instead of at the user level. So I'll be honest with you, back in the day in TAM, I didn't know, I had been, I inherited a TAM database, let's put it that way. So somebody calls me one day and says, hey, why does so-and-so have access to this? I'm like, I don't know. They've been in here for umpteen years. I have no clue. But in Epic, I was so excited about the security groups because I can identify, who has access to accounting features, who has access to reports, who has access to interface. So very similar to what Jason was saying previously, at the IT level, we also want to establish that same security in Epic. So what do users actually need to have access to based on their department or their role or location, whatever the situation is. So when you decide to start, doing changes at the user level, you're going to have to look at each individual user to figure out what has been changed on that user. There is an on-demand report for, it's over at the users level, so that's where we're going to go now. It's going to get there. So here we go. We've got your users listed here. You do have the ability to change structure access, program access, and bank account access if they're a user, not an enterprise admin. You'll notice that none of our users are actually set up in a security group because we're all consultants and we're all going to have enterprise access over this system. So here, really, the only thing that we would recommend that you edit at a user level would be things like the structure access, and make sure that you connect their employee code. If you don't connect their employee code, they can't be pulled into things like an activity as the WHO owner. So you really have to make sure that their employee code that you've created over in employees is connected here as well. Structure access is where you're going to, establish things like, do they have access to this agency and this branch and this department and this profit center? So all of those pieces are going to be listed here. And I will point out that once you have established that structure access, maybe you're doing it by office or by department or whatever the case is, you can copy those settings to new users. So if you're getting started out and you need to copy this out to several different users based on their type of role or department, once you set one up, you can go ahead and copy that out to your other users. I can't tell you how many times it's absolutely hilarious that we'll have like a new user and somebody forgets to do the structure access. They're like, I put them in Epic, but they can't see any accounts. Structure access, that's the culprit. So you can't do that at a group level, but I do recommend that you establish what that should be so you know what folks can have access to. Structure access is also where you can basically limit someone's visibility into a book of business. So if it does get messy and it gets complicated, so if you wanted to, you could create profit centers for certain books of business or certain branches. You can limit them to their certain branch. But I have had the question in the past of how can we get producers limited to just their book? Profit center is really one of the only ways, but you have to think about what the repercussions of that are. What happens when this producer leaves? What do we change it to then? This is something that you have to change at the individual level. So while it's not impossible, it is messy. So just keep that in mind. You also can establish bank account access here again at the user level, but this is an area that I also recommend doing at the security group level. So really anything other than their employee code and their structure access in here, don't recommend doing any of that from this level. We're going to jump over into a security group because that's where we would want to do that. All right, so jumping over into security groups, and I know I've already said this, but that's what I do. I jump ahead in slides because I'm being Vanna and presenting. So just as a reminder, user level, a user is not an enterprise admin. Make sure that you update their structure access, use actions copy, and then of course, security groups. They're really going to allow you to keep all of this access organized. You can add multiple users to those groups, And you can add users to multiple groups. So what that means is if I have a user that is a CSR and I want them in just my generic servicing group, they basically get to do anything that a CSR needs to do. But I also need this person to have access to some area of reports or some level of reports. What I want to do is I want to create a reports security group, like we'll go through and show in just a second. And then I only need to add those areas in that group that this person doesn't have over in the servicing group. So what that's going to do by putting them in the servicing and in the reports group, it's going to expand their access into whatever's additional in this new group that's not in that servicing group. So you're basically building onto their access by adding these additional groups. And I like to reiterate that you don't have to duplicate everything that they have access to already, because they were given that in the servicing group. So when you create these additional groups just for specific areas of access, you're just going to put in those specific areas to access. You don't have to put in everything. So looking through here, we have configuring users. We've kind of touched on that already. Like to put in a screenshot in case we have any issues with internet, which I don't today, but it's happened before. And then yeah, I didn't consult Jason about the internet thing ever. But we're going to go into actually going through the security groups. So in Epic, this is what your security group screen is going to look like. You can have as many security groups as you want. The question is, can you keep up with all of them? So I have seen folks that have just limited all kinds of access, and sometimes it's a little too much, from the Epic side if you're trying to get things processed. But there are also a reasonable amount of security groups to have, again, based on department servicing roles, where they're at, where they're going to need to be in the system. We also recommend having things like maybe an admin light. Maybe you want a user to have access to everything or mostly everything, but you don't want them to be an enterprise admin. So maybe there's just a few things that you want to restrict in general, except for all these other functions in the system. Another thing to keep in mind about security groups and about security in general is there are, within this program access, a lot of areas that you have to give access to one area to in addition to another in order for everything to work together. So if you run across that and have issues, I would highly recommend that you reach out to Applied. There is a way that you can see this information and what is connected where. That's actually on my next slide for your reference. You can go into the Epic help file and look at the security area and security options to review what the settings are for each area. So let's say, for example, and I had this happen to me this morning, actually. Someone is granted access to process premium payables in the general ledger. But in the hustle and bustle of migration and going live, we forgot to grant access to a certain bank account or another area such as receipts or disbursements that are also involved and associated with that premium payable processing. There are a lot of those little bits and pieces. And in this area of the help file, it will tell you, if you're going to grant access to this, they also have to have access to this. Otherwise, the world's not going to keep turning. So that's really the biggest thing with your security groups is you're configuring all of this information in one area. And get this, instead of having to go to each user, we can jump back over into Epic. If I wanted to see here, let's see, we've got detail and members. So if I wanted to see who's in this group, I can see that from here. But then I could go to on demand and see just the security group detail. It's still a lot of information, but because I know these users are in these specific areas, I can see now what do they all have access to instead of I've got to go through each user. Now, I will highly recommend if you know that folks have been changing security at the user level, you need to do a detailed audit of that information. You need to run their security group detail to see where it's not matching up their user detail to see where it's not matching up to a security group. And a lot of times to kind of refresh those things, you can take them out of all of the groups and then put them back in. But just remember, you can't do any of these things unless folks are logged out of Epic. So, all right, that's our security groups. I do want to point out, thank you, Andrea, that we have a lot of information that we haven't gotten to yet. Only a few slides left though. So I am going to keep going. If you do have to drop off, remember that we will be sharing the recording. But if you can stay, please feel free. I will try to cut it off within the next few minutes.
I'm sorry for being so popular, Lauren.
I'm glad you were, Jason. I'm very happy for you. All right, so I mentioned earlier that when you are configuring bank account access, it's very important to note also that there is not just bank account access, but there are also different areas of that bank account access. So just giving someone access to the bank account doesn't give them access to everything they need. You have to go through these different areas and make sure that they have access to those as well. Also keep in mind, and you might want to just come in here and explore around and see what's in different areas. You've got areas and then sub areas, so they kind of try to group things together as they make sense. When it comes to things like clients and prospects, insured client is different than a prospect. So you do have to make sure that you go in and configure prospects as well as whatever you're giving access to users in insured clients. Another thing that I love about security groups is you can restrict people from doing things that would break things. So one, for example, y'all know, I'm in accounting, so I do both sides of everything, but I'm always harping on accounting because we have to fix a lot of stuff all of the time. But one thing that causes a lot of problems is close without paying, the action of close without paying in a premium payable reconciliation. That causes all kinds of problems. So I can just set it up so that users can't even use that function. If I don't want them to use something like reverse statement, and I don't, then I just don't give access to that function. So be very careful when you're looking through these areas and really identify, is this something that they really need to have, that they need to do? But also, I don't recommend going overboard either. Yeah, users shouldn't be doing anything with accounting stuff that's not their job. But when it comes to something like reverse transactions, absolutely. If you put a transaction in and you realize you just screwed it up, I want you to be able to go back and reverse it without creating a whole bunch of other transactions that are manual reversals. So it creates a lot of efficiency on both sides. Some things you may also notice is if you do this audit and you take some things away, you're probably going to have somebody come back to you that says, hey, I can't do this anymore. And then you say, well, why were you doing that to begin with? I don't even know who gave you that access. Haha. Or you could do my famous line, which is forever going to be the cheese. Oh, there was an Epic update over the weekend and you can't do that anymore. Just make sure you make the change on a Friday. All right, so a couple of other things to keep in mind here. License groups is not necessarily something that's directly related to security, but it is an area that is in your security section. So this is basically if you have you have a branch that you want to only have a specific number of licenses, you can allocate those licenses there. So if you have somebody at that branch, you want to make sure that you're limiting those things. You can use those license groups to do that. In security, you also have something called confidential client access. So confidential client access, I'm sure everyone's seen it if you've been in Epic for any amount of time, but this is really a great feature for when you want to restrict access to certain clients, to certain users or certain groups. You can certainly do this at the client level, but if we take a look over in our configuration, you can also add several different clients at one time. So here, for example, we see these are Bobby's VIP accounts. So this is the confidential client group that we have established. And then we can come over here and say, these are the people that can actually access this group or access these clients and anything in these clients. And then here are the clients that, we only want them to have access, or we want only them to have access to. So think about folks like, if you have somebody famous in your database, or maybe you want to restrict access to any of the agency's policies that are there. Maybe you want to restrict access to employees' files and policies that are in your system. Some of that can be really sensitive information. So you can certainly create these groups. Now, I will say, if you just mark somebody as a confidential client over at the policy level, what that's going to do is that's going to restrict just the folks that are in the servicing roles on that client to be able to access them. So you don't always have to create a group. Obviously, it's more efficient and easier to see and find, just like the security groups. But I have seen where some folks will just say, you know what, I just want the people that are on this account to be able to access this account and nobody else. All right, a couple more things here. And I apologize if I'm kind of moving through a little quick. If you have questions, just throw them out there. I'm looking at them. We also have, and a lot of folks don't really dig into the activity and attachment access levels, but this is really important. And Jason mentioned something earlier about, folks that are in like benefits. There are certain levels of security that benefits folks that have access to personal health data, HIPAA, have to be restricted into. So we can use things like activity and attachment access levels to restrict that information that they are entering into Epic to just their group. But it's kind of twofold here, and you do need to prepare for this, especially when you're onboarding new users that are going to be in that benefits department or need to have, even access to just financials and things like that. So it's not just benefits. That's just a really good example because a lot of folks can relate to that. So you have two different places that you can configure this. One's going to be in activity. You can actually set activity notes to be restricted to just a certain group. So what you would do is just come in here and create whatever access levels you want. Then same thing over here in attachment. They look exactly the same. And most often agencies have the same groups for both activity and attachments. Once you do that, you also have to go into security, into your group, over into program access, and make sure that areas like your insured clients, remember, you got to do this for each type of entity, only have access to, let's go into our tab. No, it's not going to be that. Let's go to, see, all of these things, they're all over the place. We don't even have these memorized ourselves. Sub area, there we go, activities and attachments. They do group them together, but sometimes it's not as intuitive, so don't feel bad if you're like piddling around, because I just did it and I've been doing this for years. So activities down towards the bottom, this is where you would restrict that note access. So if we have somebody that just needs to access financials, or this group does, that's what we want to, that's where we want to give them access. So it's general, and then your sub area is activities, or general and sub area being attachments.
And that's important because anybody who has access to HIPAA has to have been properly trained on how to access and handle that. So by exposing your whole agency, you've really made your compliance workload a lot heavier than it needs to be.
Absolutely. I'm going to skip right on into this in Epic instead of pulling over the slide. But in addition to both of those areas, when you're adding one of these users, you need to set their default. So keep in mind, though, a default is going to pull in every time. So if they need to make a decision, then you want to leave that default blank. If you want them to consistently be adding HIPAA notes and HIPAA attachments that are restricted, that's where you want to use this user default. So go down into your user options and field defaults, and you can access whatever user it is that needs to be here and go into their attachment add activity workflow. We would want to make sure that their security access is set to HIPAA. And then you can come over into activities and do the same thing, set everything for them to HIPAA. So that would be something that you want to make sure that you add to your onboarding process and entering those employees into Epic. I do have a question from Alex. Great question. It says, is there a resource to identify recommended permissions for security groups by persona? For instance, recommended permissions for an accounting security group for a third-party accounting user. There is not a resource that I am familiar with and aware of. We typically, have kind of our set of standards. I will say that when you have Epic out of the box, there are some groups that are already created. So you may just need to go in and touch those up. I don't typically put a ton of, we're not going to go through every single little piece of security when it comes to adding new users, adding a new agency, like starting from scratch. We'll start with those security groups because they have kind of a basis laid out, and then add to or take away from there. So it is nice that Applied puts some of those security groups in there for you, kind of a little template. But I would definitely, reach out on probably the Applied Client Network forums and see if anybody has some recommended permissions for you for your security groups. Our user groups are a great resource, so I would check out there. All right, and then I have one more question. How would you configure a producer so they have only access to their accounts? So Wendy, that's where I was saying it's possible, but it's messy. You would have to, in your structure, create a profit center for that specific producer. The problem is, if you're using profit centers for something else, like we have here, then you're not going to be able to utilize the profit center for what it truly is for. You would only be able to utilize those profit centers for those producers. So you'd probably end up having to create a whole bunch of profit centers for each producer, and then to bring in these other profit centers. That's why I said it gets messy if you really want to restrict those producers to only seeing their book of business. So once you establish that profit center structure, then you would have to go over into their security and individually in the structure. Let's go to our users. You would have to come over to the user and identify, okay, here's the agency branch department profit center, agency branch department profit center for just that specific producer. Then if that user leaves, you have to get rid of that structure, and the profit center has to be changed to every single policy in order for this to work as well. So again, while it's possible, it is messy and it's very hard to take back. It's hard to implement, but it's also, kind of difficult to get rid of once you've established that. Couldn't you use the confidential client access for, so Andre asked another question, for a producer to only see his book? No. So confidential client access restricts that person to be able to, for that person to only be, I'm going to get this right in a minute. I need some more coffee. That client can only be viewed by a certain group of people, not this certain group of people can only see those clients. Good question. Literally just had that conversation the other day. It's pretty fun. Yes, Wendy. Yikes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone, since it is 3:15, I am going to go ahead and wrap everything up for us. Do have a couple of key takeaways here from Jason, of course. Jason, I'll let you jump on in and explain your key takeaways.
Yeah, so here's your homework. Stop trusting everything. Just no trust. Start at the bottom, work those role-based access controls, start using those security groups, and build up from that base. Yes, reach out to Applied Client Network, get on the forums, and see how other folks are doing it so you can get it inspired. But it's really important that you make this a reflection of how your agency and how your organization structures work. The better it meshes, the easier it is. Implement multi-factor, single sign-on. It's time to get on that train. It's time to retire the Rick. That train already left, so it's time to run and catch up to that train and then hop on that train. And
there's a song coming.
nah, not today. And give some thought to how you are going to secure that end user web browser experience, because it's probably a blind spot in your cybersecurity profile today.
Okay, very good. And then, of course, on the applied epic side of things, I did have a question from Kelly real quick. I want to answer that one. The We have someone who can't see icons on the blue bar at the top. For some reason, it's not visible to them. One thing I didn't go over is there are also visibility profiles. Out of the box, everybody's in certain visibility profiles already, but if there are certain things in the system that you don't want users to have to look at, basically, like think about epic quotes. Do you think benefits cares about epic quotes? No. So we would create that profile. You can kind of like copy the system-wide visibility, and then you can actually set it up so that users can or cannot see certain areas. So I would reach out to Applied for that. If there isn't a separate visibility profile for that person, I would check with Applied and see why they can't see Ivans. Okay, so last thing for me there, I highly recommend an audit of your user level access. If you suspect at all at any point in time that somebody went in and updated users at the user detail level instead of at the security group level, you need to go through those. Yes, it's going to take a long time to do, but it is definitely something that needs to be done in order for you to get everybody standardized. Same thing on the security groups. Don't make it too hard. Don't make it too lenient. I'm a little bit more flexible with that than IT security is. like don't over secure everything if it's not necessary, right? Just consider what those repercussions are of them having access to those areas. And again, keep in mind that there are certain places, certain functions that you can restrict them from even doing. Make sure you set up those field defaults, not just for security, but also just for consistency and to kind of eliminate keying errors throughout the system. Remember, don't set a default for someone if you want them to stop and think about what that decision needs to be. So if somebody is, in the field defaults, for example, if they sometimes use the financials access, but a lot of times they're using the public access, don't, set them as a default to financials, or we're going to have a whole bunch of problems. So just keep that in mind. Defaults are only if this is going to be really consistent. And then of course, you may have learned about some new features today. Definitely recommend, digging into those a little bit further. Hopefully we gave a good explanation of those, but always feel free to reference your Epic help file. Has a lot of great information in there about how those things work and how you can configure them. And of course you can reach out to Applied or get in touch with us. So I will leave you guys with this. Thank you so much for everyone who has joined us today. We really hope that you will find that this webinar was valuable to you. I'm sorry we went over a little bit, but that's Lauren. That's what I do. I can't finish a webinar on time. If you'd like to learn more about Kite Tech's IT and consulting services, please feel free to reach out using any of the ways listed here. We'd be happy to meet with you and learn more about your organization's technology or consulting needs. As we mentioned, we would love to hear your thoughts. So please feel free to complete our survey so that we can have wonderful webinars to come for you. Thank you guys again for attending, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.